Good morning. A couple of years ago, I decided that I was going to learn how to cook. And this sounds like it was a little late in life, but I had managed to make it that far in my life without being able to cook anything other than scrambled eggs and ramen noodles. So I probably watched one too many cooking shows, but I decided that that was something that I was going to entertain, was to learn how to cook. And so what I did was I had a Saturday where the house was empty, and I found a recipe online that looked good, and I went out and shopped and bought all my ingredients, and decided that I was going to turn into at least a marginally competent chef over a period of time. So so I had this plan, and I had some time to do this, and I bought all my ingredients. Saturday afternoon, it was nice. I had some music on, I'm cooking and whatever. I'm basically just making something for myself to sort of see if I can handle this. And it went well. I mean, I followed the recipe for the most part, and maybe 15 minutes before what I was making was ready, I steamed some vegetables and made a meal for myself, and had that realization that cooking is easy. Right? What is there to I mean, it's fun, it's enjoyable. You get to you have something that you've produced at the end of it. Cooking is something that I want to get into, and this is going to be my new thing. So I needed to graduate from my solo cooking experience, and so I decided that I would cook for the next time we hosted people at our house. And so against my wife's better judgment, she said, okay, knock yourself out, go ahead, and decided that I was going to run this whole affair. And so again, I tried to follow my plan and go out and get my ingredients and all that. But there's something about when you have all day and you're cooking for yourself and there's no agenda, that's one sort of cooking. And then there's the other kind of cooking, which is many of you who do this on a regular basis know, where there's a time limit, there's multiple people involved, and there's multiple dishes involved. And so I got into it about halfway, and I was about 2 hours away from mealtime. Had not read the recipe very closely, and it was something, I don't remember exactly, but something along the lines of marinade for 4 hours. And I was 2 hours out, so I thought, okay, this is not going well. Also realized there was an ingredient that I was missing, but I had too many things going on to be able to run out to the store or do anything else like that. So it was not going well. And the hardest part, of course, was that there was a time constraint, that at around 7 o'clock, everyone expected that there would be some sort of food served. This was not an open-ended project I had going here. And so essentially, I panicked. And I called in for the reinforcements, and I said, and my wife was kind enough to bail me out, and we managed to put something together and get it on the table at around the right time. And what I learned was there was a big difference between cooking for yourself on a Saturday afternoon with no agenda and one dish, and whenever it's ready, it's ready. And having something where you've got multiple people involved, you have side dishes, you have to make sure that things finish about at the same time so that everything is ready, and that added a whole nother level of complexity to what actually is cooking. And I thought about this a little bit, and I work with a lot of Tableau customers and who are trying to roll out Tableau beyond where they started. And so I think of that because that really is true in many ways of what it's like to be a Tableau customer when you're expanding. You have these beautiful dashboards that you built, and you saw how easy it was, and you said connect to Excel, and you pulled it up, and you created it, and you published it, and you sent it to somebody. You said, this is easy. And now you're being asked to do this on an enterprise level. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of new things that have to be considered, and there's governance issues, and there's new departments that are being brought into it. So what got you there in the first place is not what's necessarily going to get you to the next step of implementing Tableau. Tableau is simple, but implementing Tableau at the enterprise level requires a lot of moving parts to be coordinated. So what I want to talk about this morning is building a Tableau center of enablement. Sometimes we call it center of excellence, but basically it's going to show how our customers, some of our larger enterprise customers, have been able to roll this out at scale and have been able to handle a lot of the issues that come up. So I want to take you through a little bit about what a COE is, what it's actually going to, what an effective COE looks like. But first, we'll start with a definition. So again, I'm using the term center of enablement. Sometimes people use center of excellence. I'm kind of using those terms interchangeably. When I put COE up there, one of my colleagues said, "Oh, you mean comedy of errors?" And I said, "No, that's a different COE." Okay, so a center of enablement is a group of resources who are coordinating the knowledge processes and responsibility for the successful deployment and usage. So we're trying to build an organization here that's going to ensure that as we grow, as our user counts grow, as our processes grow, that we're doing this in a very, very controlled way. We're looking at this, and we're saying throughout the enterprise, but it can be anything that gets beyond just a handful of people, where a COE becomes important. It's a community of people. It's not one person. Usually there's one person that coordinates it. But it does require a community of people to pull it off. So I'll talk a little bit about the case for a COE. Before I get started, how many people have a COE today in some form in your organization? Okay. How many have not started at all, nothing even like a COE, like just, okay, a raw idea? And a few people probably in between, you kind of get some, yeah. Yeah, so that's been consistent when I gave this, is that there's a good mix of organization size and where they are on the continuum. But I do want to start out with showing a case for a Tableau COE. And I think it's important because at some point, if you're just starting this journey, you're going to have to convince people that creating this is a good idea. That it's going to require resources, it's going to require time, it's going to require people dedicate some of their week to engaging in this COE activity. So you'll probably get asked the question at some point, well, why are we doing this? I heard Tableau was easy. Can't we just roll it out? Why do we have to have a COE? So I want to talk a little bit about the case for building a COE, maybe to help you as you go back to your organizations to be able to say, okay, this is why we're looking at doing this. And it involves a lot of things. I mean, it can be a cost benefit and justification, all that, but I want to give you the basics of how to do that. Then we'll talk a little bit about kind of what a COE is, what kind of areas does it get involved with, what are the basic pieces that it works with, a little bit about some of the best practices that we've used and some of our customers have used to roll out a COE, and then maybe some real quick kind of getting started. Here's a few things you can do on Monday to kind of get this whole thing jump started. So I'm happy to take a few contextual questions as we go. I did this before and it worked okay. So if you've got a question that's in context, feel free to raise your hand. I probably will give you kind of a short answer so I can keep moving, but I'm happy to do that if there's something that you'd like to see clarified. And then obviously at the end, I'll leave time for questions. And in the other session that I've done with this, there's a lot of, here's my situation, here's what we're facing, and those are good questions for all of us to hear, because I think you'll also realize that there's a lot of people who maybe have some of the same struggles that you have in terms of getting a COE going. So that's the agenda I'm going to run through. What I want to start with in terms of the case for a Tableau COE is first to show what growth of Tableau without a COE can look like. I work in professional services. That means I work with a lot of our enterprise customers who are rolling out Tableau. And sometimes we come in early, and sometimes we help establish a COE. That's part of what we do with large enterprises. Sometimes we come in quite honestly, when they're going through some growing pains already. And these are the kinds of things that traditionally I've seen in terms of what kinds of issues are starting to crop up that really make people think about creating a COE. One of the things that you'll hear about is if you're in a situation where things are just not scaling. You had a dashboard that worked great when you were in your department or whatever, but now you don't have 8 users on it anymore. You've got 38 users on it. And now you're sharing that particular server with 4 other departments that are also putting things on there. And so there's all kinds of sort of scaling issues. You're wondering why somebody's backgrounder task is running at 2 in the afternoon and is shutting everybody off the server, those kinds of things. So those kinds of issues tend to come up as you expand. One of the things I've seen also is that there's just not a sense of knowing what's going to happen when I add something. It's easy in the early days. Let's say you're adding 3 users a week, right, to your Tableau environment. And so somebody sends you an email, says, hey, I want to get on Tableau server, and you say, you know, if you're some kind of if you're administering the server or somebody is, they say, well, just send me an email and you know, give me your details and what kind of, you know, interaction you need or whatever, and I'll go ahead and add you. And that works fine for a while. But when you're getting, you know, 20 to 30 requests per week, all of a sudden now you've got some issues that you need to think about. And those scalability issues it's not necessarily just about processing power and CPU and all that. It's also about the processes associated with growing your Tableau instance. So, you know, if it's just a chaotic environment where essentially you've got somebody who just can't keep up with the administrative load of growing Tableau server, that's a sign that maybe there needs to be more thought about the COE. One of the big things I like to look at is what we call time to value, and that means from the time somebody says, I really want to use Tableau to do X, to the time they're actually able to do that. If that time keeps growing, that's one of the key indicators that you may not have everything you need in place organizationally to be able to handle the growth of Tableau. So that time to value is important. Poorly trained users, poor adoption. If maybe you have a lot of users, but you look at some of your usage statistics and realize they're really not doing very much, and maybe they got frustrated somewhere along the line, and it's hard to know where. There's not a lot of processes attached to it. The other one that is really big is if you don't have sort of that whole COE built around your data sources and your governance. You may have 3 different people all going to hit the data warehouse, downloading that data into Excel, performing some calculations, and publishing dashboards out to Tableau server. 3 completely different results even potentially, right? If they happen to do their calculations differently, if they filter the data that they pull differently. So somebody goes out there and says, oh, I thought the number was this, and they go to another dashboard and go, oh no, the number is this. And it may be a very honest error just in terms of which records are included in there. But you lose that version of the truth, and then you lose a little bit of credibility through that. So these are the kinds of things that growth without a COE can cause. And so these are the kinds of things that if you're building a COE, you want to make sure that you're thinking about these things and preventing it, trying not to get into some of these situations. This is an internal Tableau slide or whatever that we use, but it's good because it kind of describes, and don't worry about all the small print on here, it's not relevant, but it sort of describes how a customer traditionally, and especially an enterprise customer, rolls out Tableau. So we start, and these are the dates across the bottom and just the total number of users. Not really relevant to this discussion, but the idea is that initially a customer will start with a couple copies of desktop. Somebody goes out, says, I've heard about this cool new Tableau thing, I want to try it. We call it the land and expand, right? You land a copy at somebody's desk, and they begin to use it, and they try it out and see how it works. They create a couple dashboards. It works pretty well. They get approval. They purchase a couple copies of desktop. That's kind of where things start. And then after that, there's sort of an expansion. Usually the expansion is sort of when the server gets involved. So people say, you know what, we need to share this information outside of a couple people, and we don't want to pass around Excel files anymore, so we're gonna expand and look at getting Tableau server as part of our environment. You'll see a pretty significant growth in users at that point usually, and you're getting the first sort of infrastructure-related issues start to show up and expand, but essentially they're manageable at this phase. I mean, you can generally a motivated individual can usually get their arms around most of the things that are happening. After that is where you get into what we call explosion, and that is where, let's say up until now, marketing had brought in Tableau and they were doing a lot of their stuff in marketing, but somewhere in between the blue and the orange here, a few other departments started adding Tableau servers, and they started doing more things, and then we got a whole bunch more desktops and several different departments doing all these things, and there's Tableau everywhere, but it's not necessarily controlled Tableau. It's just Tableau everywhere. We have a lot of different copies and a lot of different things going on. And that's really sort of the explode phase of things. At some point, most larger organizations get to this enterprise adoption, where they say, okay, hang on, we've got way too much Tableau out there and we don't really know what's going on. We need to actually create some enterprise adoption rules associated with that. So oftentimes that in the green is where the COE happens. What I would urge each of you to really think about in your organizations is really in the blue and the orange is when you need to be thinking about it. You can save yourself a lot of headaches and heartaches if even in the earliest stages, once you get beyond a couple of desktops, you're already starting to think about the ideas of what you're going to build into this COE. Even if it takes a little bit of time to get there, laying the groundwork, I think will pay off magnificently as you get further on. If you wait to get to the enterprise adoption, it'll happen, but it's a little bit rougher. And now you're like, well, we organized all our servers this way, and we did it this way. Oh, we organized it this way, but we want to do it in a standard way. Well, now we're undoing things, right? We're redoing and having to redeploy and all that kind of stuff. We don't want to do that if we don't have to. So how many people would say at this point in your Tableau journey, are you kind of in the land phase? It's early days for you guys. Okay, few. How about expand? All right, so you grow and get departmental. Anybody at the explode or above? Okay, good. So you've got, it's interesting, and that's been pretty consistent that we've got people at each of these phases. There's something, a COE is important no matter where you are, but you're probably going to be focused on different things depending on where you are on that cycle and what are going to be your key issues. If you're early days, you have the luxury of being able to do things right the first time and say, okay, let's grow this in a controlled way. Let's create this center that's going to actually think about these larger issues. If you're a little bit further down the road, you might have to go back to some people who in your organization say, wait, hang on, let's think about what we've just, what we've done here. Let's roll this out in a different way. Let's see if we can change how we're onboarding our users, those kinds of things. So depending on where you are, it might be a very different story. But the point is, it's almost never too early to get going. So this is what I hear it all the time when we're working with clients that said, Tableau is easy. Why do I need a COE? And this is sort of the image I use is the idea of this whole thing, a cool dashboard. That's nice, and that is really an important part about Tableau. But that's really just a small piece of what it requires to roll out Tableau at scale. So it sometimes can be a little deceiving because we see how easy that is, and we just assume that we'll just multiply that by a couple times. But honestly, all the things that we're showing here as being under the water, they're all the processes associated with your business. They're all the departments that have not been brought into this discussion yet. It might be some IT governance rules. It might be some security rules. It might be some standards about how things are done. It could be things like corporate branding and things like that just were never really an issue at any point, and now all of a sudden, as we start to expand, become a bigger thought. But my message, I think, when I talk to organizations about this is there's a lot of other things we need to start consider, and it's very much less about Tableau than it is about organizational change. Just like when I moved from cooking for one person to cooking for a lot of people, the cooking itself wasn't different. It's all the other things around it, the time constraints, the Gantt charts, all the things I needed to do things right at the same time. That's what changed. The actual cooking doesn't change. Tableau, installing Tableau Server is still installing Tableau Server. But when you've got a lot of other people involved and a lot of other things to think about in terms of security and governance and all those other things, it becomes more complicated. Okay, so this has been a little bit about why what it's like, why it's important. I'm going to talk specifically about how. How do I set up this COE? What are the things that I need to do? I'll start with what I think is probably the single most important aspect of a successful COE in terms of what can I do to make sure that this works. So there's a number of things I'm going to step through them, but I actually wanted to start with the most important one, so it's one of those, if you don't remember anything else, please keep this in mind. And it's no surprise. You've heard it probably 10 times before, even at this conference. And that is getting IT and business aligned around the Tableau COE. Absolutely critical to making this successful. How many people here are approaching Tableau from an IT-centric perspective within your organization? Meaning IT is kind of leading the Tableau organization. Okay, about a third. How many are pretty much being led by the business is leading it? Okay, wow, it's interesting. Again, pretty evenly split. So each of you, depending on which group you fall in, are going to have a different mission. If you're from the IT organization, you're going to try to build this COE, and you're going to have to do some recruiting. You're going to have to go and find the people in the business who will be impacted by Tableau, who will be making different business decisions, who will have users potentially doing data analysis, and you're going to have to pull them into this whole idea of COE. And my experience is that's not always an easy process, right? That they're looking at it and saying, well, again, just set me up on desktop. I'm good. I'm not worried about the governance stuff or whatever. That's your deal, right? You're looking for this whole idea of a balance. I'll talk about balance in a second. Good friend of mine does agile consulting as a profession, and so he always talks about the fact that if you're meeting too often with the other side, it's about bringing IT and business together. He says if you're scheduling meetings, all of a sudden I'm concerned. Your communication between your two departments should be such that you don't have to schedule a weekly meeting. You're already talking as much as you possibly can. And it's great if you can be co-located or kind of co-located. That's not always possible. But to the degree that you're scheduling a monthly update on the COE, that may not be that may be a sign that you're not as integrated as you need to be. This really should be a constant communication. If you're on the business side and you've brought in Tableau and you've gotten it to a certain point, and now you're going to be bringing in IT, and I'll just name one of the things I see a lot is IT is going to say, and most times they don't have time for this. I mean that's just a common refrain, right? That it's just they've got 100 things on their plate, and you're asking them to do this 101 thing that's not been budgeted for, that they don't have headcount for, and all those sorts of issues. So you're probably going to face that. But the idea here is that this is going to make everybody's life easier, and they're going to reap a lot of the benefits from a well-executed Tableau installation. And so there is a case to be made, and there is a little bit of recruiting that needs to happen that way as well, to be able to recruit the IT folks that are going to be a part of this and showing them the value that they're going to get. But the key thing is to make sure that both sides are involved. This is a hike that I did this summer, and actually they don't tell you. There was this vague thing about a ridge line 4 miles into the hike, right, or whatever. So they give you a little bit of an indication that this is coming up. But the picture doesn't really do justice. But you're literally on this little thin thing, and it falls off on both sides. And so I'm in the front there, and I wouldn't. I mean, my buddy took a picture. I was like, I was so focused on the next foot. The thought I had was to get a camera out, but he did. So whatever. So we can at least record that we did this. But it's a example. It's a picture for me, a word picture of this whole idea of having that balance, and why that balance is absolutely so important. If you have a COE that is dominated by one side, even if you supposedly have participants from the other side, you're just not going to be as successful. To the point that if you know that the leader is going to be from one side, you really want to encourage extra participation from the other side to make sure you kind of get that balance. One of the questions I usually get is, well, should this be led by IT or should it be led by the business? I've heard different theories about it. I don't feel strongly, I don't think there's a right answer to that question. I think it really depends on your organization. But I would say regardless of which way you go with that, you've just got to make sure that you're able to strike that balance. So if it's going to be IT-led, or the main COE person is going to be IT-led, that's fine, but there better be a lot of business involvement in that, and vice versa. So here's why you want this balance. IT is really good at the things on the left. And if you're a business user, you don't think about those things because you don't have to. They have to think about those things all the time. They have to think about governance. They have to think about usage monitoring. They have to think about scalability. As much as that seems like a burden sometimes, you want that in your environment. You want those kinds of things. You want somebody to be thinking about those kinds of things in your environment. You want them thinking a step ahead in terms of infrastructure. You want them thinking about the security of the data. You want them thinking about HIPAA or whatever other regulations you've got associated with your data, and planning for that and making sure the firewalls are correct and all that. And conversely, if you're on the IT side, you want people who know those things on the right. You want somebody who understands the business, who knows about what it's going to take to roll this out, who knows what it's going to take to get users to use this. Somebody who's focused on where does this data exist out in, is this data that we don't currently have in our world and we need to go get it? What's the competitor data that might be good to add to this based on what's going on with the business? People who know how to share that knowledge, people who are going to share this throughout the organization, who are going to show better business decisions. When you have that balance right, it works really, really well. You're just leveraging each other's strengths, and it's like anything, it's not always smooth. Sometimes it's a contentious thing because you've got slightly misaligned goals. But at the end of the day, you're trying to build this in an effective way, and for the most part, it can be done. It just requires a little bit of negotiation between the two groups. So. Always keep in mind, again, I'm harping on this IT business idea that you need to have both involved, but it really is the single most important thing you can do in terms of making your COE successful. All right, so what are some of the areas that a Center of Enablement or Center of Excellence will focus on, and what are the key responsibilities that people need to do? This is sort of some more of the how-to. It starts with a strategy discussion. And I tell people this doesn't mean that you have to go into a whole large 40-page corporate strategy document or anything like that. But you do have to spend a little bit of time thinking through what pieces of information am I trying to get out of this? What's the goal here? What am I trying to enable people to do? So thinking about the strategy a little bit, and you might even have to create a business case for this. So remember I said that some of you nobody's bought into this COE idea. Part of doing this strategy thing is you may have to do a business case that says, here's why we need a COE. This is what we're going to get out of a COE. One of the things I tell people is show some measurable benefits from this strategy. So you're going to do this, and then what are you going to get out of it? What's actually going to change in your organization based on creating this? So I'll give you an example. One of my favorite metrics is one I've already mentioned, and that is from the time somebody says, I want to use Tableau, till the time they produce a usable dashboard that can be shared throughout the organization or with whoever they want to share it with. How long does that process take? It's a great metric, because it sums up all of the things that have to happen for your organization to be effective. So if you go back today and say somebody who's not a Tableau user, they're sitting at their desk, they see a business problem, they think, Tableau might be able to solve this problem. So they have that thought. What do they do? We're going to talk about some of the steps in getting them there, but a great strategy measure is to say, to the degree that I can shorten that length of time, my COE is being successful, right? My COE is helping the business in that particular way. So don't be afraid to put, I tell people sometimes you can do like a charter document. It doesn't have to be long and drawn out, but you can actually create a charter document that says, here's what we're trying to do. Here's our goal. Here's what we're laying out to do within the organization. Okay, so training, obviously everybody thinks of training and says, oh yeah, well, everybody takes Tableau desktop training. Tableau desktop training is, if we go back to our iceberg, it's the top part, right? Yeah, you should definitely, training's great. You should take Tableau desktop training so you get up to speed and understand the basics of how to use it. But there's so much more to training within your environment than just that. And that could include obviously things like, the online videos and how to do parameters and, all the sessions that we have around here. But a lot of the training has to do with your environment in particular. And I think sometimes that gets lost or forgotten. So when you get a little further down the road, there's going to be a process that you define for how to publish a dashboard, let's say, for example. It may be that you request access to a data source, and then you create it and you publish it to a sandbox or a QA environment, and then there's an approver process or something like that, and then somebody actually looks at it and approves it. I don't know what your process will be, but there will be some sort of process. That's the kind of thing that people need training on that. I mean, they're not going to know necessarily how to do that. And so that needs to be part of the whole idea of getting people up to speed, right? It's not just about, how do I do complex calculations and, parameters and things like that. It really is understanding all aspects of training, including the training that helps me with my environment. Okay, so adoption is one of those things that I always say it this way: having Tableau installed is not adoption. Okay, so if your charter document should not say our goal is to roll out 50 users. That's not. I mean, okay, that's a start, but that's really not what you're shooting for. What you're shooting for is having people actually use this and be effective with this. So you're having to. There's a number of barriers you need to overcome to get to this point. This is not easy. I mean, just be honest. It's not easy. It requires sometimes hand-holding. It requires cajoling. It requires marketing. It requires all kinds of things to get people used to doing this. You're asking people, in most cases, to change what they're doing. And so to get that change to stick is going to require some effort and probably some time. Some people will just pick it up and they'll run, and you'll never hear from them again because they're so happy. But that's usually that's usually less than 50%, and maybe significantly less than 50%. A lot of other people need more than that. So the great thing about adoption and building adoption into your COE is you can measure it. You can absolutely measure adoption. Using Tableau Server, and you can, there are so many reports you can get just out of the box, plus, more that you can create on your own. Say, how many people are hitting this data source? How many people are hitting this visual? How many people are logged in? What are the data sources that are popular? What are the data sources that nobody looks at? Even getting down to what are the fields that nobody looks at? Where are people spending their time? When was the last time this person logged in? All of those things are out there in Tableau Server. And so because they can be measured, adoption and how your center of enablement is doing at adoption is something you can track. And if you can track it, it makes it a lot easier to kind of get an idea of, okay, what needs to change. You'll find where people are falling off the adoption wagon or whatever, right? So they get to a certain point and then they fall, and that's normal. And so part of what enterprise adoption consultants do is you help move them to the next phase. When they get frustrated, you find out where it is, how can you help them? Oh, I couldn't find this data, so I just gave up, right? Or I couldn't figure out how to download this information, so, and I tried to create a line chart, but it wasn't formatting the way I wanted to. And it could be, a lot of times it's very simple stuff. But as somebody who's working on adoption, it's your responsibility to kind of help them through each one of those and be able to measure that over time. People will not necessarily just start, some will, but a lot of them will need a little bit more hand-holding than that. Has anybody had adoption issues within their organizations before? I mean, it's pretty common. Yeah, actually, I'm surprised it's not higher because it's pretty common issue. Okay, so onboarding. Let's go back to the big question. From the time somebody gets the idea of Tableau till the time they're effective, what does that look like? What's the processes associated with that? When you're thinking about onboarding, think about every step that needs to happen. How do I document it? Where do I put it? Where's the information for the users? What needs to happen? Is there a batch process that automatically adds users to server? Do they need to fill out a form? what has to happen? And you can do, there's a lot of ways you can do it depending on your organization. But what's it going to take? And more importantly, how do I streamline that, right? Because there's nothing, there's nothing as frustrating as saying, I want this because I've got an idea, and it's a week before you can get it. And you're like, okay, what was I going to do with that again? Right? Request a license key, and we'll get back to you in a couple of days, and then we'll get approval. And I realize that some of these things do need to happen organizationally, but to the degree that you can facilitate onboarding and get the people moving through the cycle as quickly as possible, you're just going to get better. You're going to get better success. So again, asking that question: how long does it take to get from A to B, and how do I optimize that? Key for an effective COE. The G word, dun, dun, dun. Governance. Yeah, you need governance. There's no other way to look at it. You have to have some way of managing, and mostly it's usually a data discussion. Who's going to be able to see this? How are they going to be able to roll it out? Where's the data going to be stored? Is it secure? How is it going to be backed up? And those kinds of things also get into more administration. But what are your rules associated with those things? Sometimes, if your data is not particularly sensitive, your governance is more focused on just administrative pieces as opposed to security. But you do need some sort of governance. I also strongly encourage, as part of a governance, for you to think about creating these standard data sources for your organization. If you sort of identify the kinds of things that people want to use throughout your organization, say, okay, so it looks like you want to have this database data, plus you've got a couple Excel lookups that you have on your desktop that you blend with that. Let's see what we can do about creating a Tableau data source for you that's standard and is always there and doesn't change, and only changes when the data gets updated, and that not only you can use, but everybody in the organization can use. That exercise will pay dividends multiple times over. So if you're looking at, as you're starting to see what people are using, honestly, a lot of times people just start out with a lot of Excel spreadsheets in some organizations, or they've got their favorite table in the data warehouse that they can hit. But start thinking about it a little bit more holistically and look at all the different aspects of it and say, can I create standard data sources? Because if you can create standard data sources, when the next person who wants to use Tableau signs up, and they don't have to think about data, that's huge. That's absolutely enormous in terms of their productivity. So get them to the point where they can simply just say, oh yeah, I just connect and I go to Tableau server and here's a whole bunch of data sources. Here's some for marketing, here's some for HR, and here's the ones I have access to, and I get it. So those things are key to building a successful COE, and governance is a big part of that. You're going to be setting up all the rules on who can see what, for example, all those kinds of things. This is one of those little things, but I think it makes a big difference. I really encourage our customers to set up an internal office hours. We do it at Tableau, and here's generally how it works. You let everybody know that if you're a Tableau user and you have a question, there will be somebody available, let's say, between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon to answer any miscellaneous question you might have. It's an ask the expert kind of thing. Obviously, we really encourage it to be staffed by somebody within the organization. What that does is, a lot of times people feel like, oh, I don't want to keep bugging somebody with, I've got all these questions, and I don't want to keep sending them emails or calling them or whatever. It gives people a safe environment to ask a lot of questions. It's not all that different from what we do at Tableau Doctor here at the conference. If I hear, I've worked Tableau Doctor a few times, and people always come up and go, oh, I've had this question for so long. It's like I've always wanted to know, or I've always wondered how to do this, and you give them a place to answer those questions, and it makes a huge difference. And so, even if it's just, like I said, a couple hours, if your organization is very, very geographically dispersed, have an open WebEx or something like that that's just sitting open, and then as soon as somebody comes in, it basically means, hey, I got a question, and share the screen or do whatever you need to do. If you're a little bit more, if you're in one office, have it literally where somebody's going to be sitting at their desk for 2 hours, right, and just answering questions. Doesn't mean they're stopping their productivity, but they're available. So I've seen office hours as one of those, like, it sounds like a little thing, but it really makes a big difference for people, and it helps them to become more effective as they're using Tableau and as they're moving through, the whole cycle of, okay, how do I do this? How do I get from A to B? Office hours can be very effective. I mentioned administration a little bit ago. Somebody has to think about backup and recovery, right? Somebody has to think about what happens if this server goes goodbye. You guys need to have those discussions in a COE to say, how long can you be without this? If this thing is not available because of a hardware failure or whatever, how long can you afford to do this? How often do I need to back up? What's your point of failure and all that kind of stuff? So all those kinds of questions that, again, IT's really, really good at this. They do this for all your other systems. They know how to do it. They can give you all kinds of 3-letter definitions to things that you didn't know about. And so they can navigate through it. But it's a question you need to ask, and you need to think about how these things are going to be backed up. What happens when you restore? How does data get refreshed? Right? How do things get updated? Those are the kinds of things you really want to think about as part of your COE process. What are your best practices? So best practices are not just sort of like, making sure you use the right visualization type. That certainly is part of it. But I really encourage organizations to create internal best practices. So one of the things that a lot of enterprises will do is they will create some standard templates for dashboards, for example. So if you want to create a dashboard on a screen, you'll lay it out, and across the top, the standard is to put the filters across the top, to have the corporate logo in the bottom right, to use blue for all of the, a particular decorative, feature, something like that. All of those little things make it so much easier for people who are trying to kind of get started for the first time. And so rather than, when I open Tableau Desktop, I go, okay, what do I do? File new, what happens? You can just say, let me go to the server, and I'll download an existing dashboard. Then maybe I'll see if I can point it to my data. And the stuff, and the filters and those kinds of things, I at least know where to lay them out, or how to lay them out, or how it should look. I have a model to base it off of, and you're giving examples, you're giving content, you're showing best practices in your organization. So if you can create, it's usually worth your while to create a little bit of do a little branding exercise, create a couple templates, maybe a couple different looks that you think would be appropriate. Go ahead and publish those out into a sandbox on server that people can look at if they need some ideas or just need to know how to make something look good. Because you're going to have people who are brilliant data scientists who don't know how to necessarily make data look like anything other than data. And then you've got people on the other side who really need some help with how do I integrate some of the the more deep computations and calculations into this, who know how to make things look really nice. So take advantage of those people and leverage their skills within the organization. So again, best practices, yeah, there's regular old best practices, but then there's also organizational best practices. All right, 2 more. So monitoring, obviously you want to keep your eyes on what's going on. I mentioned monitoring in the context of usage, and I think that's a really important piece of monitoring to do. You really want to make sure that you know who's doing what, what's the peak time for the server being hit, what data sources are getting a lot of traction, which ones are not. All those kinds of factors are important. And then finally, the last part is community. So to be effective, honestly, there's this built-in tension of business and IT and Tableau, and how do we make sure it's controlled, but make sure it's easy to use, and there's that. A lot of those things get overcome when you have a relationship with the people on the COE. It sounds trite, but it's true. If these are people that you're not just working on a business goal and all that, but you have some kind of relationship, and you're both bought into what you're trying to do at the end of the day. You may have different things that you care about, but you're focused on, okay, we're trying to get from A to B, and we've got a lot of things to overcome. And a large part of that is just building that sort of Tableau-focused community within your organization. Anyone who is connected to Tableau in some way, whether it's somebody who's just a desktop user or somebody who's the server administrator or whatever, getting them involved, getting them talking about some of the struggles that they have. I mean, it's good to hear from IT about why they're struggling with response time, because everybody has to hit the server between 10 and 12 on a Monday morning. How do we, what can we do, to kind of augment that? Communication, community, those kinds of things make a huge difference when you're trying to build a COE. So these are kind of the 8, I'll call them 8, or 10, I'm sorry, 10, I used to have 8, tenets of key areas within the Tableau COE to think about. You're going to have, as you roll yours out, different things you want to emphasize, but I would strongly encourage you to think through each of these areas and make sure that when you're creating your charter document or whatever, that you're thinking about each of these areas. Yeah, sure.
Where would you put prioritization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would look at, and this is usually when I work with organizations, I look and say, well, where are we struggling? What's the low-hanging fruit as far as what people are struggling with? A lot of times it's onboarding is what gets a high priority. I don't want to be too prescriptive about this because it really does vary. Sometimes people can't get any access to the data, and so they're stuck in their tracks. So you really need to focus on that. What's our low-hanging fruit that's really preventing us from being effective? Is it that users are not able to get it takes them too long to get signed in to Tableau or to get access to Tableau, or they can't get access to any of the data, or it's too complicated? There could be a lot of sort of aspects. Most of the time, I would say, if I had answered, I'd say it focuses on adoption issues. So it's how do I get people to be effective in terms of using Tableau? And then those are usually a lot of the times the items I'll have to tackle first in terms of working with clients. But I can't, it's hard to prioritize based on those 10 areas and say, well, this one's more important than this, because I would say some things like office hours you don't have to do right away, right? But governance, yeah, there's certain things you cannot do until certain governance things are taken care of. A lot depends on your organization. Yeah.
I meant the COE's responsibility for prioritization of requests coming in. Like, you start out
Oh, okay.
when you land, you're working on one request. But
Yep.
when you get to expand, people find out you're there and they start bringing requests your way.
Right.
Where does the COE play in helping prioritize those?
Prioritize. So when you say request, do you mean like I want a copy of I want to sign up, or I want a new data source put out there, or whatever?
Or a new report.
A new report. Yeah.
Project.
Yeah. So that is that is a.
Is that part of the COE?
It's part. Yeah, absolutely. It's part of the COE. I also would. There's one of the things we haven't talked a lot about, and that is executive sponsorship. It's okay to lean a little bit on your executive sponsor for stuff like that, where you literally don't know. There's like 4 requests from 4 different places. They all seem like pretty important requests. It's not bad to sort of, hey, let me talk to the executive sponsor about this. Get his or her view of how that should happen, what should be the priority within the organization, and use that as input. At the end of the day, obviously, it's tough to say, this report is more important than this report, or your dashboard is more important than your dashboard. What I also tell people is, at the same time you're handling these one-off reports, build your infrastructure. Don't stop everything and say, nope, I can't take any requests right now. I'm busy building infrastructure, right? Or say, while we're scaling out, no more dashboard requests. That's just not realistic. You're not going to get where you need to go. So all the time that you're handling these new requests that are coming in, 20% of that ends up being something that you're going to use again. You find out from a department, hey, we need to add 300 external users to the site. And they won't hit it very often, but we need to add all 300. Okay, so that's a request that you have. So as part of fulfilling that request, I'm going to build a batch process that handles mass updates of people into Tableau server, and I'm going to build that into my infrastructure for the next time that things come in. As opposed to saying, no new users until we get all these structures up. Make it a part of what you do. And the other side of that is, don't ever stop building infrastructure, right? Don't just say, okay, we're just going to handle individual requests, and because there's never time to do it. There's never time to build your charter and your backup plan and all that kind of stuff. There isn't. You have to do that as part of what you're getting done. So it's not, it's obviously it's a balancing act. I would lean a little bit on the executive sponsor to do that as well. I'm just going to do a couple more, and I'm going to take questions here. This is a sample. People sometimes ask me, well, what, organizationally, how should it look? This is just a virtual organization, but it shows some of the people that need to be involved in that in your COE. So you might have subject matter experts on Tableau, maybe somebody who is a train the trainer kind of person, somebody who is just an expert at different aspects of using Tableau. You may have liaisons to different organizational entities. So the marketing person that is kind of in charge of Tableau would be part of the COE. You'd have different users that are people who actually use the dashboards, people who create the dashboards, all kinds of different people who are kind of interested in the Tableau environment. And then you've got an executive sponsor. Depending on the size of your organization, this could be 2 people, it could be 25 people who are part of your COE. And that is not, there's no right answer there. One of the other aspects of this is people, a lot of times when we're getting in these discussions with our customers, people say, well, who should coordinate this, who should lead this, who should get this going? And that's an item that we can talk about. But I'd say in this context that we're talking about here at the conference, I would say everybody in this room is probably a good candidate to lead a COE effort, because you're here and you obviously, this is something you're focused on and you care about. And sometimes it's one of those things where it's like, if it's going to happen, I at least need to be the one that gets the ball rolling. So when you go back and you're thinking about all the challenges and all that, don't be afraid. You don't need a ton of technical knowledge. You don't need to be a Tableau calculations guru to pull this off. This is more about helping your organization navigate some change. And that is something all of us, I think, can get our arms around and can understand. And if you're willing to to reach out, to bring people in, to be a little bit of a recruiter within your organization, you can absolutely pull off the COE stuff. That's how it gets done. That's how it's effective. It's not people putting out brilliant dashboards and then walking away and say, isn't this great? I mean, it's just not done that way, right? It's done by getting your organization and the people within your organization focused on what you're trying to accomplish, recruiting them, getting them to think about it, getting them part of the COE team, and then constantly updating your mission as you move forward. So I think all of you, I don't know your individual situations, I don't know the size of your organizations, but definitely consider of whether you would be the right one to get this thing going. All right, I think I have more slides, but I think I'm pretty much out of time if I want to do any questions. So this is cool. You can look at this later. So this is kind of the key steps going from pre-work all the way through refinement. So there's things you're going to have to do before you even get started. If you haven't started with a COE yet, you need to think about this cost-benefit analysis. You need to think about the business case. You need to figure out if somebody's going to pay for it. Is this going to be all volunteer? Is this going to be somebody's going to cut off 8 hours a week for this? Or how's that going to get done? And then create a timeline for implementation. So don't be afraid of this. This is not weeks of work to do this. It's just simply writing down some things and making the business case within your organization. Say, look, this is important. If we don't do this, there's a lot of things that we're going to run into. And if we do this, we're going to be so much more effective in our Tableau implementation. We're going to get time to value way past anything we'll be able to get if we just let this thing grow organically. So making that case and then moving through the different steps of actually implementing it with a lot of the things we've talked about today is going to be key. So, all right, I want to leave a few minutes for questions, and I would encourage you to stick around as long as you can. There'll be a few questions here, and then I'll stay afterwards if you've got individual questions. But I'll open it up. Yeah, in the back. Yeah, so the question was this whole idea that you can just wave a magic wand and make Tableau happen in your organization. Is that what you're asking about? Yeah. So that's common, just so you know. I mean, that's something that, again, because Tableau is easy to use and because it works and you can create very beautiful things. By the way, before I forget, fill out your surveys. Sorry, I have to switch to the surveys. Otherwise, it's not official. There you go. So yeah, fill out your service. That's a common problem that occurs, is that most organizations feel like it should be easy. But again, you remember you're dealing with organizational change. That's really what this is. This is not a technical issue you're dealing with. You're dealing with an organizational change issue, and you're going to face all of those kinds of things. So your magic wand might be limited to the cool dashboard you can create in minutes. That's the magic wand department, right? But what it takes to actually roll this out at scale, there's no magic wand for that, right? There's methods that you can do to do it. It's not that it can't be done. It requires a different skill set. And I think as you talk to an executive sponsor about this, I think showing the distinguishing between the technology and building dashboards and creating an effective business analytics culture, and what all the organizational things we need to do to get that to happen, and how those two things are different. Cooking for one person versus preparing an entire dinner party with multiple dishes. They're at the core there's similarities, but they're very, very different in terms of what needs to get done. Is that helpful? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, good information. Thank you. That last slide you just went away from.
Yeah. The full.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That seems like that would work for a very small organization. It's much easier to kind of get some traction around all of those ideas. Do you have a recommendation for larger organizations about where you start?
Yeah.
Getting those executive sponsors, which areas of the company should really be the tip of the spear when you're trying to implement?
Sure. That's a good question. Yeah. So really talking about when you've got a large organization and you've got a lot of stakeholders involved, how do you get started? A good place to think about oftentimes is who has something invested in the success of Tableau from an executive perspective, right? There's somebody in the organization who stepped up and said, I'm going to tell the organization that I think this is worthwhile, that I think we should put this in our budget for the year, and we should do this. So there's somebody within your organization who has made that step. They're a great person to talk to about this whole idea, because they have a vested interest in it. They have a stake in it, and it's a little bit easier to make the case to people who are very, very interested in seeing this succeed. So that normally happens organically when we start talking about creating a COE. Normally, those people are the people that have been interested in seeing what analytical culture can do and what Tableau can do for their organization, and have the vision to see that. And those are great places to start. And then from there, they may give you other names and people you need to talk to, but I'd start there. Yeah. Sorry, with you in a second. Go ahead. Yeah, so question was, are there formulas for ROI for a COE? I don't have any spreadsheet. Here's what I've seen done. A lot of it has to do with time to value. So when you're talking about, okay, here's a cost and there's a benefit. The costs are pretty clear, although they're not that big. You've got some minimal people time and those kinds of things. Your benefits are going to be, essentially, you should be able to do more with less if you're effective. You're going to effectively use your core server licenses, those kinds of things. But really, there's a lot of time to value in this that makes it the benefit. And those are, I get those are hard numbers to figure out. But I would start with that. If I can create a dashboard that is, or analytics that are going to save me this or help me to see this kind of data first, how much is it worth to the organization to be able to do that twice as fast? What is it worth to the organization to know that those numbers are correct? What is it worth to the organization to know that there's information, there's value in, we say this, there's value in just knowing data, right? That sometimes it's hard to put a cost in. Now there's going to be lots of other things you can do, specific benefits, but I focus on that time to value, right? If it's going to take you 3 weeks versus 3 months, that's worth something. So, but I don't have I don't have a spreadsheet or an Excel formula to do that. But those are some of the things I think about or talk about. Yeah, sure in front.
So I have an organizational question.
Yeah.
Like our organization had a big data center, and they're going to the cloud, so then they want to reduce footprint. So going to AWS is like, it can be done. But then they also set the Excel service as well. So they bought like the Tableau licenses and everything.
Mm-hmm.
but people still want their reports. Like people are not getting into like, they are not getting into self-service model.
Right,
This-
right.
I just want my report.
Yeah, yeah.
And I want my Excel.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So he's basically talking about this is one of the most common things we see. People who have run most of their career off Excel reports, and now you're giving them access to Tableau and all the things that Tableau can do, and they're slow to adopt, right? So a lot of times we'll go into a client and they'll say, here's the reports we want you to produce. And we look at them and we kind of cringe and we go, okay. But the idea is it's like there's a okay but. And this is the way the okay but works. Okay, we can put that data into Excel, but tell me what you're trying to learn from it. What is the information you would like to see? What are the questions that you're trying to answer? And 9 times out of 10, you'll be able to create a way better way to answer those business questions than the way they've been answered it before. So I don't say no. I just say okay, but tell me what are you trying to get? What are you trying to accomplish? And then show them a way within Tableau to do that. Show them that it's more effective. Show them that my favorite things are basically how numbers don't pop, visuals pop. So if we have all kinds of examples within Tableau where you show a spreadsheet and you say, show me, or how long does it take you to find which region is the lowest selling region in the country, and it's basically a big spreadsheet. And then you put the same information in a nice functional bar chart with color highlighting and all that, and it's like that. Those are the kinds of things where you say, I can actually make it more effective. And then you give them the old and the new is going to be better, right? But it's a process. Most organizations struggle with that. We're dealing with 30 years of legacy Excel reporting here, right? I mean, or whatever, maybe not 30 years, but a long tail to the way people have done things. So it's going to require some time to get there. And just showing them a better way, being a little bit of an evangelist for data analytics and self-service and all that goes a long way. Yeah. Yeah, make sure, so the biggest thing I always tell people is think about, go back to that, put yourself in the person's shoes that's trying to get something done. And think about if I'm sitting at my desk and I have an idea and I know that I can get a dashboard done, what is every single step I need to go through in my organization, and and then your view from the COE is, how do I streamline every single one of those processes I possibly can? How do I make sure that the license procurement process is smooth? I mean, I know it sometimes requires approvals and all that, but I'm going to make that as smooth as possible. How do I make sure that they know exactly where to go for initial training? How do I make sure that I've built a intranet site where it's got all the information you need about how to use Tableau within our organization, right? And populating that with good content and giving them an email that they can call with, or they can send something to with questions, all that. So really thinking about that, every step they have to go through, and then do your best to optimize every step in that process. Cool. Yeah.
So you've got an organization with SMEs and IT and business, but they're assigned other projects or it's busy. So what kind of incentives do you create to
Yeah.
relationships with students so that you work with them?
Yeah, so what I encourage people to do is do it with relationships, right? People will respond to you as a person much better than they will, some organizational dictate on how we want to do this. It's almost like if you're the person that's trying to get this going, you have to be just a recruiter. You've got to sit down and say, hey, I'm trying to get, almost like it's a personal relationship, not. You're not trying to make their life more difficult. You explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, and you're asking for a favor, whatever it takes. I try to, I encourage people to make sure you've got 2 or 3 people who you can personally talk to recruit, right? To just say, look, I'm going to sit down one-to-one. I'm not going to send out an email say, hey, let me know if you want to help with Tableau. I'm going to sit down and have lunch with them or go sit at their desk, and I'm going to personally recruit them and say, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's what I would need. Can you help me out? And that's to get things bootstrapped. That's to get things started. And then after that, once you have that core, you can send out the email that says, hey, we're going to be meeting in this conference room to talk about there's Tableau local training coming up, and we want to make sure people are prepared or whatever. But recruiting is really what it comes down to at those early stages, to encourage people You know, that we're doing this because it has a lot of value and is valuable to me as a person, you know, not just to the organization. And I think that makes a big difference. Yeah, in the back. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like a lot of organizations, right? You're trying to get this thing going, and you feel like, yeah, am I the only one that's pulling here or whatever? And I get that. I would say, you know, it's not unusual for 6 months to a year to have one or two people doing almost all the pulling to get this thing going until it develops its own momentum. And you can't be afraid of that, unfortunately, because that's the reality of getting these things moving organizationally. So I would say that, you know, stick with it. It generally, for most organizations, it does get a little better as you start to build a little bit more momentum. And be a recruiter. Try to get other people in. As far as the question about the same people coming all the time, yeah, I don't know how much you can do about that, really. On the one hand, you're helping them. Yeah. If you're getting the same sort of questions all the time, that might be time to go take a training class. So, cool. All right. Well, I think I need to vacate, but thank you all. I'll be up here. Hey, George, I see you.